It makes scrawling a swastika on something change from unthinkable to just dangerous. It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave, and if you don't leave, you might start reading and buying into hateful ideas there. It seems like such a small and simple thing, but it's things like this that erode our safeguards against dangers we sacrifice so much to fight.
Hello there. Today's video is going to be a little bit off topic. I'm going to be talking about video games. I don't focus a lot of attention on video games normally. I used to be really into video games, but now I'm trying to be more involved in big boy activities. But as a kid growing up, I loved video games, and some of my fondest memories were playing Battlefield 1942 on the PC, or some of the older Call of Duty games on the Xbox 360. Which brings me to this video that I was recently alerted to. This is a video by Extra Credits, who I have no fucking idea who this guy is. But it's Stop Normalizing Nazism. Of course, my first thought on this is, weren't the Nazis part of World War II? Seems odd that you would leave them out of a World War II game. When my attention was directed to this video, the first thing I noticed, it had 9,500 likes and holy shit, 60,000 dislikes? Whew. That's not a very good ratio. So let's see what this video has to say.
There you are, playing the PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of a sudden, you're a Nazi. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose this. Yet there it is.
You know what this reminds me of? All of the people who lived in and grew up in Germany during the period of time that the Nazis controlled that country. I bet a lot of those people didn't ask for that. They didn't get to choose that. If you were a German citizen and you turned 18 years old in 1939, you didn't have a whole lot of options available to you. You couldn't simply choose to join the United States Army, for example. Your path was already set. Now, I understand certain wars, it may be ambiguous who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. The Vietnam War is often used as an example of this. But there are other wars, and let's be honest, World War II is one of them, where it's pretty obvious who were the good guys and who were the not so good guys. Now, in hindsight, it's very easy to want to play for the winning side and the morally correct side. I understand the author of this video that he wants to play as the Americans or the British. He doesn't want to play as the Nazis. Not only were they the losers of the war, but they were involved in some pretty terrible things. Things that I'm not going to defend in this video. Now, in regards to all of the countries involved in World War II, most people would consider Nazi Germany to be the worst. But there were other bad actors as well. Chief amongst those would be Imperial Japan. I think most people would agree that Imperial Japan did things that they never should have done during World War II. Everyone would agree that, just like in the context of a German citizen who grew up during that time, a Japanese citizen would have also had a limited ability to choose his state in life. The fact that they served in the military that was proven to be on the wrong side of history, does that mean there is nothing to be gained at all from seeing things from the perspective of an ordinary Japanese soldier? There just isn't anything of value whatsoever in seeing things from this point of view.
This is bad on so many levels. No one should ever have a random chance of fighting for the Nazis.
But the historical truth is that people in fact had a random chance of fighting for the Nazis. Unless the author of this video has some sort of weird religious beliefs where he believes that we all get to choose in what time period and in what country that we're born. But the reality is that that's unlikely to be true. If you were born a German citizen around the time of World War II, you had no choice but to become a Nazi. The country was ruled by a dictatorship. There weren't other political parties that you were freely able to join. They didn't have freedom of speech or freedom of press. If you were drafted into the army, you fought for the Nazi-controlled dictatorship.
And before anyone equivocates and says not all German soldiers in World War II were Nazis, if they were wearing the swastika and are functioning as an arm of the Nazi government, then unless the game goes out of its way to tell you specifically that your particular character is not a Nazi, then they're a Nazi.
Sure, I can agree with the author's point here. If you served in the German military during World War II, you were serving a Nazi-controlled government, and you could fairly be described as a Nazi. It was no secret that the Nazis were pretty racist. And I'm sure a lot of the people who served in the German military shared those beliefs. Now, I'm sure there were also some people who didn't share those beliefs, but nonetheless they served because, let's be honest, what choice did they have? Like I said before, people don't choose what time and place they're born into. But let's think about this just a little bit harder. Why are the Nazis considered so evil? Why are they considered the worst example in history of a despotic country? The reason, of course, is the Holocaust and the death camps that the Nazis ran. Had the Holocaust not happened, had the Nazis not run these death camps, they still probably would have been seen as evil. They probably would have had a similar reputation as, for example, Imperial Japan does today. But I don't see why they would be seen as ultra evil. Sure, they still would have been racist, but they would not have committed genocide. And any sort of atrocities they would have committed, if the Holocaust and death camps never happened, would not have been far apart from, once again, Imperial Japan, another country that I think we could agree was also racist. Now, the author of this video seems like he's pretty much absolutely disgusted with even the prospect of playing as a German World War II soldier. Bringing it back to the point he originally made, those German World War II soldiers were definitely Nazis. But one thing that they almost certainly were not aware of is the death camps and the Holocaust. The Nazi government kept that all a secret. Remember, the country was a dictatorship. They didn't have freedom of speech or freedom of the press. And certainly a lot of people did know that this was going on, but the camps were run by the Nazi SS. They weren't run by the military. Although the military may have been involved, the vast majority of German soldiers serving in the military were likely unaware that this was going on. I'm not saying this to defend the German military during World War II. These were people who were knowingly fighting to defend a racist dictatorship. But at the same time, it would not be fair to take the terrible crimes that the Nazis committed in secret and associate those with all of the soldiers fighting for the German army.
In that multiplayer shooter, when it switched you to the German side, did it go out of its way to tell you that the person you're playing was pressed into service under threat of their life? Yeah, that's a big ol' nope.
Well, as a person playing the game, you can come up with whatever backstory you want for your character. You can ascribe whatever motives that you choose. At the end of the day, though, German citizens were subject to propaganda. Once again, they lived under a dictatorship. They didn't have freedom of speech. Every piece of news and information that a German citizen received was subject to censorship and propaganda. The average German was not given a dossier that explained all of the crimes that the Nazi party committed, all of the atrocities that were going on in secret, and then were given a choice whether they wanted to serve in the German military, knowing full well that they were serving a country that was committing genocide. To the extent that a game puts you in the role of a soldier, where you're given a gun, explained your mission, but you're not given a proper historical context. You're not told all of the details and things that are going on in the background. To the extent, again, that a game does this, it is accurately portraying the position of a soldier in warfare.
Even if you put aside all of the people who have had traumatic experiences with these groups, who have lost loved ones to terrorists, or who have had generations of their families wiped out by Nazis, no one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent.
Well, where does it end? Are we no longer going to have movies that have Nazis in them anymore because someone might get offended? Are we not going to be able to have Nazis as enemies in video games? Are we going to have to change history so that every time a Nazi is portrayed in any sort of media, they have to be portrayed in a negative light as some sort of villainous character, even if historically that was not necessarily true for every single soldier that served in the German army? This sort of drive to demonize an entire group of people, most of whom did absolutely nothing wrong, to blame problems that a small group of very powerful people were responsible for on an entire group of people who were mostly ignorant to what was going on, reminds me of something in history. It reminds me of a country during World War II that tried to scapegoat all of its problems and demonize a particular group of people. This sort of country would censor its media so that anytime a member of that group was portrayed, it was always in an extremely negative light. Now, of course, during World War II, they did not have video games. But if they did, you could bet that you would not be allowed to play as a member from that group.
And by making people do so, we get them to stop thinking about it, to stop thinking of the meaning behind these things. We normalize them.
So you're telling me that if you play a video game and during a multiplayer match, it assigns you to the side of the Nazis, that suddenly you forget history? All of a sudden the Nazis become just another country? All those horrible things that they did are just forgiven because you played them in a video game? Could you be any less charitable and more condescending to people who like to play video games than this asshole is?
We make them just window dressing for entertainment. Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us. They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies.
We're back to this topic of disgust. It's clear from this portion of the video that Extra Credits is physically disgusted by any sort of thing that he associates with the Nazis. That includes the Iron Cross, which, by the way, is not a Nazi symbol, as well as any sort of German World War II military uniform. According to Extra Credits, it's not only natural for someone to be disgusted by physical objects that are not inherently gross, but that someone who isn't disgusted by the sight of an Iron Cross or a German military uniform is a morally defective person. Now, I don't mean to toot my own horn or anything, but I've read some books on morality, and specifically some of Jonathan Haidt's books. And he indicates that disgust is a moral foundation that we as human beings evolved. If you, for example, have sex with your sister and are open about it to people, they will become physically disgusted and view you as an immoral individual. So what does it mean when Extra Credit starts rambling on about how disgusted he is with inanimate objects such as a uniform or an Iron Cross? Well, it shows that he's making conclusions not based on reasoning, not based on arguments or empirical data. He's making arguments based off of emotion and his own personal morality. Extra Credits views an Iron Cross as disgusting because he's so morally committed to his position, to the point where he's well past the point where anyone could possibly reason with him. He's gone off the deep end, in other words. You might have very good points you want to make in response to what he's saying in this video, but when he listens to these points, he's not going to have an open mind. He's going to be physically sickened upon hearing them.
But for some people, it moves them from the territory of revolting to just edgy. It makes scrawling a swastika on something change from unthinkable to just dangerous. It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave, and if you don't leave, you might start reading and buying into hateful ideas there.
This portion of the video gives pretty good insight into Extra Credits psychology. As someone who is so adamantly anti-Nazi, it is surprising that he would believe that people could be so easily persuaded to adopt Nazi beliefs just by reading about them on an internet website. Certainly someone who was confident in their political beliefs would not believe that people could be so easily swayed especially by a political ideology that he personally hates and actually finds physically disgusting. So why is Extra Credits so concerned that people might go to these websites? Well, we already know that he's internalized his political beliefs and turned them into moral beliefs. Like I said earlier, you could not have a reasonable debate with him on whether there are aspects of his video that are wrong. He views this as a moral issue, and any sort of discussion like that would offend him or possibly even disgust him. That's why he is so afraid that someone may be swayed to the other side. He assumes that other people are like him, that upon reading some sort of Nazi website, that people will take the information and moralize it to the point where they won't be open to other points of view. They'll just make up their mind, and then anyone who says anything to the opposite will be some sort of disgusting heathen. In Extra Credits' view, there is no point for discussion, no purpose for freedom of speech. He has almost a war mentality. You must destroy the other side. They cannot be allowed to even preach their ideas because people may hear them and then become immediately biased.
Don't make there be no in-game moral difference between your Nazis and your allies, between your terrorists and your counter-terrorist squads. Frame PvP as a training exercise, or simply take one of your non-odious sides and recolor them so that it's red versus blue, rather than Axis versus allies.
Yeah, so this is what this asshole really wants to do. He wants to make the battles ridiculous. Who wants to buy a World War II game, boot up the multiplayer, and have it be a battle of the Americans versus the Americans? That's absolutely ridiculous. Nobody wants that. Here's a better idea. Don't assume that people are immature children. We don't need safe spaces in video games. We can take for granted the fact that people understand that the Nazis did things that were horrible, that the United States and other countries did not engage in. We don't need the game to explain these things to us. Everyone knows this.
Don't have players randomly spawn in as one or the other. Allow players to choose which side they're on. Now, of course, this has all sorts of in-game problems, such as creating shorter wait times for fascists, but you know what? Those wait times could be artificially extended, if it meant players had an active choice in what teams they would represent.
I'm not opposed to what Extra Credits is proposing in allowing the players to choose what side they want to fight on in a multiplayer map. That's how it was in Battlefield 1942. Contrary to what Extra Credits said, though, there was never any problems fielding the Nazi team. Plenty of people seemed mature enough to be willing to play for the other side if it was necessary to create even teams. I don't recall ever playing that game that it was a major issue where everyone wanted to play on the Allies side and nobody ever wanted to play on the Axis. Now that's how Battlefield 1942 worked, but I don't think every game has to be the same way as Battlefield 1942. There may be reasons why you don't want people to be able to pick their team. Chief among them that I could think of is if the game used some sort of balancing system that tried to create teams of even skill level. Now, I'm not sure if there's really anything like that exists. Once again, it's been a long time since I really played a lot of video games. But assuming something like that did exist, then I don't understand why players should be forced to choose a team. These World War II games tend to be marketed towards adults. If you're an adult in the United States, you're expected to be a citizen of a republic. You should have the maturity level to be able to play on the Nazi side or the Soviet Union side or whatever side and not absolutely lose your shit. If you play a game of Call of Duty and it puts you on the Nazi side in a multiplayer game, and then you in turn become an actual Nazi, then there's far bigger problems in our society going on than the fucking video game.
And if you're going to say, but we need it for historical reasons, then your game better actually be historical. You can't really just hide behind the fact you called your desert map El Alamein and say, but it's historical. If that were the case, you need your PvP to at least represent real historical events and be a realistic take on those battles. Once you make both sides balanced, it's also no longer historical. And you can't really say that you need Nazis anymore for historical accuracy.
Yeah, but here's the thing. These video game companies don't have to justify shit to you, Extra Credits. They can make whatever fucking game that they want. Because guess what? In the United States, we have freedom. For someone who hates Nazis so much, I thought you would have some sort of appreciation for that. But it's clear that you don't. So stop playing these World War II games. You should stick to more safe space games, like Overwatch. I'm sure that game will not offend you at all. You can leave the World War II games to the more mature people, the adult gamers, who aren't going to completely lose their shit because the game assigns them to play on the side of the Nazis in a multiplayer World War II match.
And you can't declare that your game will suffer if you don't put players in the jackboots of the Third Reich. And once your map is something carefully designed to have good gameplay by a team in a room in San Francisco or LA, and it's not a faithful reconstruction of the actual places the historical events occurred in, you can no longer say we need to have players take up arms in service of terror or hate. But what we are saying is that the fact that you're playing as a Nazi or a terrorist in a game has to mean something.
Wait a minute. The podium there, you barking out orders at other people like you're some sort of boss in charge of them? There's something weird going on here. Something that just isn't right. If you like this video, please subscribe.